How do you plan out your individual classes and keep an eye on the pacing? Today's episode is a leveling up episode where I coach Tamica, a Spanish teacher in New Jersey. Lesson planning with a close eye on timing and class pacing is the area where she wants to level up her teaching. So let's start the conversation. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and you are joining us today for a Leveling Up episode, which is a coaching episode that I am doing with a teacher. And so our teacher today is Tamica, and she is a Spanish teacher in New Jersey. And she would like to talk about streamlining her lesson planning, and we'll get into that a bit. But welcome to the podcast, and thanks so much for being here today, Tamica.
Thank you, Joshua. I'm super excited.
We had talked quickly earlier about this being a little bit of a transition place in your teaching career. So can you talk to us about what that is for the context?
Absolutely. So I entered the classroom in 2007 as an elementary school Spanish teacher. And that was the bulk of that was the extent of my experience. It was a wonderful experience. I really did enjoy working with children that small. I think probably because I didn't have young children at that time, it made it easier to be surrounded by young children all day. And I did that until I got married and had my son. And then when I decided to go back to school, I knew that I wanted to transition to working with a slightly older set of kids. I subbed in my town to kind of just get a feel for the different age groups. And I realized that high school is not for me. And I settled on middle school and was able to find a job 15 minutes from my house. It's a wonderful school, super supportive staff, extremely diverse. It's home for sure as far as schools go to me. But teaching 7-year-olds is very different than teaching 14-year-olds, specifically because I'm prepping them for the next level, whereas the elementary kids, it's just kind of exposure and getting them to enjoy it. But I need to make sure that my students are ready to move on to Spanish 2, or if I need to re-recommend them for Spanish 1, fine. But I'm trying to get them ready for Spanish 2 in their 9th grade year. So that's where I am. So I've been there since 2020. Yes, 2020, the heart of the pandemic.
Yeah, you had to hit the ground running going during the pandemic for sure. Yeah, so myself, I teach elementary and middle school. So I have grades 1 through 8. So I can see where you're talking about what the idea of lesson planning with that eye towards preparing them for the next level, who's going to have them next. And there's a lot of talk about more proficiency and what's happening in there. So it is definitely a different way of going about it. So what is the area specifically that we want to focus on today?
So I'd like to specifically focus on my lesson planning because I have 4 different classes. I have a wide a range of students in my classes. I have some kids who speak Spanish at home but have never taken formal languages. I have some students who have no idea of the concept of a gendered language. Specifically lesson planning for my 50-minute block to make sure that I have some routine, right? But also the thing I think I'm missing out on a lot of is finding time to assess. I think I'm either planning too much or too little when I'm doing my lesson plans. And that's kind of what I need to streamline.
Okay, so let's dive in and unpack that a bit so that we can come to a concrete goal for the conversation. So The first question I want to put out to you is, can you give an example of when you are in the midst of a class, whether you're 20 minutes in or 30 minutes in, where you sort of have this realization that this could have been planned better? What is that? What's leading you to think, oh, this wasn't as effective as possible?
It's usually coming toward the end of I would say within the last 10 to 15 minutes. And I'm getting the vibe that either they got it, right? They picked this up, they're utilizing the material, they're comfortable with it, and I still have 15 minutes to fill. So it can look like that. Or I could be, we could have worked on something and I might be doing in one of the comprehension activities, whether it be a video activity or a writing activity or listening activity, and they are lost. And I have 10 minutes, and maybe I very rarely have all of my kids lost, but I have some that if they're lost, I know I didn't hit the mark. I have some that are always going to pick it up. And then I only have 10, 15 minutes left. And I'm like, do I go back to the drawing board? What do I say? Stop this, do one of the rote activities that we tend to do, and I can start over tomorrow. I'm usually like in 30 minutes in, 40 minutes in, and I go, oh, like this is not landing, or this was too easy. And now what do I do?
And so when that happens in the moment, when you ask yourself, so what do I do? What are some things that you have done to sort of mitigate that situation?
So I have I love routine, and I really kind of drill this in that first month of school. So I have what I call like a basket, una canasta, my basket of tricks or games that my kids can always go to. There's a gemelos, it's like playing Spot It in Spanish. There's a card game called 99, and I can expand that to make it simpler or, larger to practice numbers. I always have like a Pictionary and Hangman like set up with our current vocab. So I can say, okay, we've got 10 minutes, pick one of these, pick a group of your choosing. Sometimes I put them in groups, but I like to give them groups of choice too. Go into a group of your choice and pick an activity and do that for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So then they're working on something else. They're not even still necessarily in what I was trying to do, because if it's not landing, then I don't feel right assessing it. I know they need a little more.
So if you could think of maybe pinpointing one or two things that might be the underlying factor that are contributing to the lessons not feeling like they're flowing correctly, what would you think that might be?
If I were to make a guess, I would say I feel uncertain that I'm hitting kind of all of the learning styles with my topic. Do you know what I mean? I've got learners who can hear what I'm saying, and that's how they do it best. I have learners who need the visuals that I put on the board, and that's how they do it best. I'm not sure that in my plans, I'm hitting all the styles. And then and then when they have to work together, some people are getting it and some people aren't. And so it's not flowing the way I want it to flow in that conversation part of the class.
And so that sounds like it's kind of getting into the area of differentiation a bit, where you're having different styles and different students are at different places. You even mentioned having some heritage speakers and then some that are new to the language. So that's contributing to it as well. To help us kind of focus in on what our goal will be. So now, taking into consideration where those hurdles have been, if you kind of look forward with some rose-colored glasses on, and you have a class, you have a week of classes where you look back at all of them and you say, those all went really well this week. What would those classes look like where that's happening?
It would look like, so my welcoming routine went well. The kids were engaged. People participated. I don't love to lecture, I like to present and then have them engage with something. So maybe I do a short 5 to 10 minute presentation, right, of our agenda and our objectives. And then I give them the tool to say, you're going to investigate this or investigate that. And then we come back together and we are able to kind of then take what we were working on and apply it to some activities. And because they were able to work on their own, maybe using a variety of tools, a reading or a video, I let them choose, and then they're able to apply it accurately. And then I have some kind of like exit something that they're handing to me to confirm that they got it, and we can move on.
Okay. And does that seem achievable to you?
Now that I said it out loud, yes. I don't think I ever visualized I never taken the time to say, this is what I want it to look like. So yeah, it sounds very achievable.
Right. Yeah. And I think we get into this place as teachers where we're such on the treadmill of the everyday.
Yeah.
and okay, this needs to be better for tomorrow, this, I need to change this for tomorrow, or in the moment with my number of
Mm-hmm.
preps and everything. And I think that that's one of the great things that comes out of these coaching episodes that I'm doing here, is that we're just taking a break, taking a breath, and
Mm-hmm.
really looking at what is it that we want. And I love
Yeah.
that you sort of said that I never really looked at what the
Never.
possibilities could be. And and if you see it as achievable, then we can find a way to get there. But if
Right.
you have a goal that doesn't seem achievable, then we need to talk
Right.
about some other stuff,
Yeah. My
you
goal is
know?
like, I want to be better, but that's not like a
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. What I was hearing there in terms of setting a goal is this interplay between pacing within your class,
Mm-hmm.
right? So pacing where the activities flow into another activity, and then being able to actually accomplish that, right?
Right.
So it's the
Mm-hmm.
pacing set up in a way where you can accomplish all the goals.
Mm-hmm.
What I was hearing, and you can totally say, "Oh, that's not really right." It feels like you're maybe trying to do too much within a class,
Guaranteed.
and right, and so
100%.
that's the treadmill, right? Always on
Mm-hmm.
that treadmill of what's next,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that if we look at setting up a template for what your class looks like, not
Mm-hmm.
cookie cutter, always the same, but a template that says, we are going to do 3 activities in a class. And you said
Yeah.
your classes are 50 minutes long?
I have 50-minute classes. Yes.
Okay. So set it up into 3 parts or maybe 4 parts, depending on however the math works out with the minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and to either do 2 or 3 activities.
Mm-hmm.
And activities could mean something that you're explaining or something that you're watching, just, that are different. And I think specifically at the middle school level, if you do one activity for an entire class, you're going to lose them, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
too long,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And something else that might be contributing to trying to do so much is you feel like you have to keep them engaged by doing something else and not
Right.
spending too
I
long,
think
right?
I feel like I have this need for constant engagement. 100%.
Hmm.
I do the same thing as a mom now that I think about it. It's like we feel like we always, because I feel I'm in this space where like I don't want someone to look through the window and say, right, the 2 minutes I'm not constantly engaged and go, well, what are you guys doing in there? So
Right.
I guess I have to
Right.
let that go. That's a mindset shift I need to make.
Yeah, and it's also that mindset shift is what engagement actually is and what it looks like.
Right.
Like what it looks like to the untrained eye and what it looks like to a master educator are different.
Right.
Students watching a video where you're doing it as sort of a comprehensible input activity where they're
Mm-hmm.
not directly engaged with output during it,
Mm-hmm.
but that they're watching it with a goal of finding certain words or cultural aspects, or
Mm-hmm.
they're going to give their opinion after. That
Mm-hmm.
is complete and total engagement,
Mm-hmm.
but to look
Mm-hmm.
at it, it looks really passive,
Right.
so it's like if you know that and you ever have to answer for it, it's funny because how often do we actually have to answer for that? The
I don't think
fear is that
I don't think anyone's ever, never, whenever like administrations popped into my class, they're just thrilled my kids are in the target language, right?
Mhm.
So they're like, "Oh, great job," and I'm like, "But I need to do better."
Yeah, so that's like we put it on ourselves and we
Mm-hmm.
create that anxiety and expectation. If somebody walks in right now, I need to be able to explain exactly what we're doing. And
Right.
I mean, yes, we should have some general idea, but feeling confident that the pacing is where it should be. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that when I use the word template for a class,
Mm-hmm.
it's to say that the template is there are 3 activities.
Mm-hmm.
That's the template.
Okay.
And one of them is going to be group interaction. One
Mm-hmm.
of them is going to be partner interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them might be sort of a solo activity where
Solo.
they're watching something or they're reading something. And I mean, the watching and reading can also happen in a group and in pairs,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but also have something that's individual. And that individual could also be you leading a discussion with the
Mm-hmm.
entire class, but
Mm-hmm.
they are responding just to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's the whole class, but that would
Mm-hmm.
be individual. That would be a little more teacher centered, whereas the other
Yeah.
ones wouldn't be, right? So
Yeah.
looking at like what are those three sections of the class and
Mm-hmm.
what are three possible things to be doing differently, and coming up with a whole variety of possibilities of what those could be,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
you have those 10 things that can happen,
Right.
and
Like
then
that
you kind of mix
toolbox.
and match them in based on the
Mm-hmm.
unit
Mm-hmm.
and what you're doing.
That's a really good idea. I love the idea of the solo activity too, because that would give me time I would let them work solo, and that would give me time to walk over to those kids who I know need more support and check in if
Hmm.
everyone's, before I send them to work with a partner, and so they feel a bit more confident. So that's a
Hmm.
really great idea.
And also, you'll figure out once you get into the routine of doing that, of where things work best, where you
Hmm.
might see with certain classes that the individual stuff is best at the beginning.
Right.
Or maybe you'll think, oh, it's actually best at the end because you really need to corral the students
Hmm.
back in.
Hmm.
Like, you don't
Hmm.
want to end with a group activity and then it's time to leave. So
Yeah.
you'll figure out, like, that's what I mean when I use the word pacing for a
Hmm.
class,
Hmm.
is it's like you feel like it's in the pocket. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
and that it's like it's flowing. Like you've
Yeah.
achieved the flow. Like you feel that in the classroom of when things work out and when they don't.
100%. Yeah.
So let's think maybe about what some of those segments could look like,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Let's come up with 6 together
Okay.
right here, and you'll have those ready to go, right? So we'll look at like 15-minute segments, okay?
Okay.
So let's use things that have worked well in your class.
Hmm.
You're not reinventing the wheel. There are things
Yeah.
you've done well, and we're just going to focus on those things. And you're going to be like, wow, there's a lot of things that I've done really well. And
Hmm.
I'm just going to do those now, and I'm going to have a great class. So, what has been one activity you've done with students that you've been proud of?
And the thing is, I do so much, I really have to try to like whittle this down. So I know one thing that I love and I'm excited about is kind of doing that flip the classroom thing, where I find tools and videos for them to watch and make them take their own notes. That
Mm-hmm.
way, when we come back to our group discussion, like our whole class discussion, they already have an idea and they can throw their questions at me then. So that solo portion of like putting resources in our LMS system and letting them take notes individually, I like that. I do this thing called volleyball reading. Like if they have a reading activity, so they're volleying with their partner and they read for 1 minute with their partner, and then a timer goes off and they have to switch and go
Mm-hmm.
to the next partner. And whoever is the closest to the beginning, they start there. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of repetition. They get a lot of vocab that way. So volleyball reading,
Mm-hmm.
the videos for input. I do jigsaw groups for like a group thing where I put them, say, a group of
Mm-hmm.
4, and like, or I have 4 topics, and like you're going to become the expert on each one of these 4 topics, and then it's your task to then present that topic to a larger group,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you start with your solo research, and then you come up with you and the other
Okay.
4 experts create a presentation along with some kind of assessment at the end, fill in the blank, true or false. And then you guys spread out and you present it to the other kids in the other group.
So if we take those 3 things you just mentioned, okay? So we had the individual
Mm-hmm.
activity where they're either reading or listening to something and
Mm-hmm.
they're pulling out their own understanding of it. And then the second activity
Mm-hmm.
was with the volleyball reading, and then the third activity was the jigsaw, right? So say you were using those 3 activities in a class. Do you think that those activities could happen for just 15 minutes each in one class, or do they need more time?
If you put it all together, it's 45 minutes. I could piece it out. Like the jigsaw group needs more than 15 minutes. The volleyball read needs more than 15 minutes. But the volleyball probably
Mhm.
needs 10. The solo probably needs 10, right? And then I could give the
Mhm.
rest to the jigsaw because when they're in bigger groups, right, they just need more time.
Mhm.
And then the presentations, which I guess I would probably have to push off to the
Mhm.
next day, but that could mean presenting and then also assess, right? Presenting applying and assessing. So I could look at it as a 2-day thing instead of a 1-day thing, which is probably not a bad idea.
So I think that what you were saying at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, where you're trying to get it all done, is taking a step back, looking at, I want to do
Mm-hmm.
these 3 activities on a particular topic, and actually put out
Mm-hmm.
what is the minutes that are needed on it. And so when I originally said 15 minutes and you said, oh
Mm-hmm.
no, this one would be 10, this would be 10, the other one would be more. And then you even got to that place yourself where
Right.
you're like, oh, this is going to have to go to the next day. So by
Mm-hmm.
just putting the minutes on the activities, you've
Mm-hmm.
already set up a pacing for your class where you're not going to get to
Right.
that point where, oh, this isn't working. And then you
Mm-hmm.
start to realize, oh, this is going to be over 2 days. And you might realize with a class, once you're in the habit of doing it, is that the volleyball reading, they really get
Mm-hmm.
into,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually going to be 15 or 20 minutes, and for
Mm-hmm.
that particular class, and name it that, or
Shorter.
adjust what they're reading
Mm-hmm.
and make it shorter so it does only take 10 minutes.
So I can't expand it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then put the minutes on it, and the more you do it, and actually watch when you're doing these
Mm-hmm.
activities in your class, watch the clock and actually
Mm-hmm.
note how long it took
Mm-hmm.
before, I call it the
We're
tipping
done.
point,
Yeah.
when it's like, okay, yeah, this activity's over, and it needed to end 3 minutes ago for me to call it effective, So as you're doing the activities, figure out, like, actually
Mm-hmm.
write down the time
Okay.
and watch it like a data collection, and say, when I do volleyball reading, this is a good length of text,
Okay.
and for it to take 10 minutes. And so when you plan for that, you're going to plan for 10 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll
Mm-hmm.
become part of your routine, and I think the more you can take those activities and put a time on it and figure out what it looks like within that time frame, then you can start to plan out these
Mm-hmm.
classes that feel productive.
Right. And I want my kids to feel like they were engaged. I want to feel productive, and I want to feel like we're moving forward without me, like, juggling 17 different things. Cause I know that teaching is like public speaking, right? It's basically a performance. You can't always be on for the full 50 minutes. That's impossible. Even Beyonce takes a break. And then also, like, I feel like I rush them. And that's why the pacing also, aside from rushing myself, I'm rushing them, and that's not good for them.
So in terms of an action plan for you, taking all this in, right? A lot of different things to do. So I would say that for this week, and I don't think you're probably back in school yet, we're having this conversation over the summer, but if you were in the classroom, but here's something you can think of for the next week. Because I always like to say this week and then ongoing. So do something this week that feels achievable so that you keep going with the plan. And so for this week, I would say maybe put together that list of 6 to 10 activities that you do in your classroom. And for at least the fall, stick to those activities. Don't feel like you have to do everything, and make sure that in those activities you're hitting on the modes. And don't forget, please, as I always say to teachers, don't forget to make one of those activities just kids having fun and enjoying the language. Like, we have to plan for that. We have to make sure we do it, because if we don't, it's not going to be there. So make that list of what are going to be your go-to activities that you can use in different ways. And start with thinking, which 3 will I use in any given class to help with your pacing? And that's going to sort of be the ongoing, because then once you start using them, really note how long they take. And then as you're doing your lesson planning, you'll say, oh, I can't do this activity and this activity in the same class because it takes way more time, and I'm going to feel like I'm rushing them.
Right. Oh, that's such good feedback.
Or these 2 activities or these 3 activities, and they're really like 5 to 10 minute activities. I'm going to end up in that place you mentioned earlier where there's 15 minutes left, right? So it's very analytical and looking at data with minutes and things like that, but it'll become second nature the more you do it and it feels successful. Does that kind of make sense for you?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. I'm actually excited to get started planning. I do have a couple weeks left before I go back, but I'm going today to clean out my classroom. So I'm getting in school mode. So I'm excited to have, right? If you give me a map or a recipe, I can follow it. But I realized I just wasn't asking myself the right questions to create an actual recipe, for success. Yeah. So thank you.
I think the other thing with having go-to activities is it's more comfortable for students. They anticipate them, they know what to do with them, and you don't have to explain them every time, which helps so much with pacing, because you do a new activity, you think it's going to take 2 minutes to explain, and you're 17 minutes in, and there's 400 questions, and then it's the end of the class. Yeah. So the more you're using activities that they recognize, the less you have to account for that as well.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Well, Tamica, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I am very envious of your students and your energy and everything you bring to the classroom. And I'm going to check in with you in a couple of months and see how things are going. We can have a follow-up conversation. And I'm going to send you notes on everything that we talked about, along with some resources as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how great this was for me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. I'm really excited. It feels good to be excited to go back to work.
Oh, that is the best thing I have ever heard. Thank you so much. What insights or inspiration did you take away from that coaching session? If you want to dive deeper into your own teaching practice, consider joining me for a Leveling Up episode. Just click the link in the show notes and we can set it up. You'll also see a link while you're there for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.